Welcome back to the panel discussion 360 Degrees of Government Data, sponsored by MarkLogic, here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. Our guests today are Colonel Linda Jansen, Acting Director of the Army Architecture Integration Center and the Army's Chief Data Officer. George Chambers is Executive Director at the Office of Enterprise Application Development in the Office of the CIO at Health and Human Services. John Felleman is Senior Innovation Specialist and Team Lead for the Acquisition Gateway at the GSA's Federal Acquisition Service. Wolf Tomby, Chief Technology Officer at U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and Kevin Shelley, Vice President of Public Sector at MarkLogic. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And before the break, we were talking about the use of unlike data and unstructured data, and how do you bring that together in some manner to make it useful for today's missions and today's technology. And George, why don't we pick up with you next on that issue at HHS, because as you mentioned earlier, there are so many domains and missions under the umbrella of HHS.
Okay, so I'll follow on from my colleagues' prior discussion. I think we have a responsibility at HHS to recognize the data and its origin, its applications, and what technologies are going to be best suited. So I agree that we need to embrace new technologies, but I also understand that there's plenty of opportunity to use existing technologies. It's not all about being able to mine unrelated data sources and use algorithms to show their relationships. We know certain relationships exist, either through the health data that you would find at CMS or the research that you would find out of NIH. So how to best apply the technologies that best match those data sources and be able to pull those together. And that's really the competing demands that we have at the Office of CIO, is where can you focus your energies and how broad can you go? Not to ignore the new technologies and not to sidestep or back burner existing technologies, but to bring them all to the source of the issue. And so that's what we find, is that we're wrestling with data warehouse and business intelligence platforms, how to consolidate where it makes most sense, to offer flexibility to the mission-specific areas that have chosen their technology for good purposes, being able to bring that data together and data mine it, use analytics. We're not at a point now where we're going toward preventive analytics, but at least at a minimum, understand how can you report that and provide dashboards and insight to the users so they can make use of that data. And then finally, as we are required by law with the Data Act, existing known relationships, financial data that is distributed across multiple federated departments, large departments, how do you bring those known together and have a consolidated view? So it's the entire spectrum.
So it's safe to say that, say, within a given silo, if you will, at HHS, say within one of the NIH institutes, they've already got their relationships and their data models and their applications fine. Probably no need to change that. But if they want to share and do analytics, say, with someone at CDC or any combination you could think of, that's when the challenges come, and maybe the new technology injection would help make that happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. And John, you were saying earlier at GSA, you've got other agencies' data, you've got your own data, and as people look to kind of consolidate this view of procurement and acquisition across government, which has been a pretty tough goal, and there's been a lot of runs at it over the years, it sounds like somehow getting unlike data sets and unstructured and structured data together might offer a solution for this holy grail type of application.
Yeah, and of course, the first key to our success, and I'm confident that we're on the road to success, is that it's not a holy grail. It's looking at a problem, understanding how to solve that problem, and doing it in a stepwise, logical way. So just to mention a few of those steps, if we look, first of all, at the data platforms, we're doing the same things that my colleagues here have described. We're building a business services platform, which is actually a cloud-based platform that a lot of our future IT systems will use, and that will enable a lot of commonality in terms of the tools that are used for storing and analyzing data. And where we have new data sources or newly revisited data sources, we're trying to get out in front of the chaos by specifying the kinds of data standards that people can abide by. On the other side, and coming back to really some of the work that we're doing on the gateway, we're trying to do two things. First of all, in the same way that we meet our end users where they are, we're trying to meet our data providers where they are to a certain extent, and also to incent helpful behaviors. So in that regard, we're building tools that work without a lot of complicated structured data, but we're providing data connections so that some of our internal customers are in a position to provide more data that then helps them reach the government community. So again, we're giving them the incentive instead of telling them that their data has to be in a certain format. We say, if you can start bringing your data to us in one of these formats, you're going to be successful. We are also being very thoughtful about introducing new technology. As Kevin said, we think it's a big part of how we're going to be successful. The gateway itself is very much a client-side tool. We're using a lot of the same technologies that you see on the web today from startups and from the private sector. A lot of JavaScript where we can be very flexible, which, by the way, also helps us a lot on some of the security issues that the Colonel mentioned. We try and put the data that has to be locked down where it can be well locked down, and we can provide a lot of flexibility and move pretty quickly using an agile process when we're building the different applications that people are using. So that's really how we're tackling this on multiple fronts.
All right. And Wolf, when I think of Customs and Border Protection, I think of data sources ranging from what people are writing on clipboards all the way to from towers bristling with all sorts of sensors that can see and hear and sense explosions and whatever the case might be. So how do you organize all that, unlike types of data, to some mission?
That is a really great question, because you're absolutely right. Earlier we talked about like our cargo and passenger data, and all that is coming into our relational databases and for our major applications, so it's highly structured. However, you hit the nail on the head. We have dozens and hundreds, actually, of sensors all along the border that are looking for everything from footsteps on the ground to heat sensors that are attempting to detect people coming across the borders. We have the towers that have radar, laser finder detections, video cameras on them. We have drones that are flying the border with video and other sensors on the drones. And all that data is also feeding in to the enterprise. So how do we capitalize on that? And how do we merge that with our highly structured data? And I think one of the things that we're looking at, and I agree with Kevin entirely, and one of the things we're looking at is the big data capability. So the promise of big data is giving us the ability to digest that data and make use of it fairly straightforward in a way that saves money, that allows us to kind of get that data and combine it with our structured data. The other thing I want to mention, though, is if you look at what our mission is in terms of protecting America, it's protecting America from terrorists. It's also protecting America from the international criminal cartels. So there's a lot of data out on the internet about what these people are doing. It's publicly available. Sometimes the bad guys aren't terribly smart. They're not locking it down. They're putting it out on Facebook or whatever. That data is out there. So how do we get to that data so that we're aware of what the external threats are? Now, the interesting thing about that data is the Research and Analysis Group, IDG, just released a report this year on what they call the digital universe, which is the volume of data worldwide. Shockingly, what's happening, according to them, and I have every reason to believe it's accurate, the volume of data across the world is doubling every 2 years. They estimate that by 2020, that's only 4.5 years from now, actually a little less, the volume of data worldwide will be 44 zettabytes. How do you make sense of 44 zettabytes worth of data and pick out those few data records that you really want access to? That's going to be a tremendous challenge. Now think about that. If that keeps doubling, we'll all probably live to see the era of the yottabyte in data worldwide. that's the phenomenal
I
challenge.
can hardly wait.
Like, how do you manage that challenge? I mean, it's you got to be willing to adopt new technology. You got to be willing to think out of the box to even stand a chance of keeping up with that.
Well, I guess storage is a good business to be in for a while anyhow. But Kevin, I wanted to ask you on the question of data standards. We've heard a lot of talk in the last few minutes about data standards and why they're so important to getting organization of the data stores that an agency does have. But can data standards alone help with the issue of making sense of unlike data sets or unrelated data sets into some other larger purpose?
So I would say as it relates to data standards, certainly some degree of standardization is good. But when I listen to my colleagues talk, Colonel Jansen was talking about as you embark on a new initiative, you need to get consensus on things such as data formats. John, you had mentioned something about formats, get us data to certain formats and we can accept it. That is a little bit of old school thinking. It's more based on the relational model, and the relational model dictates that you need to have a data model or a schema to move the data, right? There are new technologies out there today where you can ingest data as is, and it immediately becomes searchable, so you can be getting leverage from your data without having to do the upfront data modeling. And to your point, it's not rip and replace, right? You've got a tremendous amount invested in your current technologies, but let's say you want to move data around or connect the silos. There's new technologies out there where you don't have to do the upfront ETL process. You don't have to do the schema or data modeling, and that could augment your current systems. And slowly over time, as you have new requirements and develop new applications, you would do those on the new platform, so you become more and more embracing the new technology. So the relational model is terrific, but it's just not suited for today's data.
All right, so what are some of the technical challenges to getting there? I mean, is that something you're thinking about? George, tell us about HHS. I mean, the world beyond relational, beyond really what has been IT's standards for 40 or 50 years.
In HHH's situation, I believe that we do have volumes of data, but they're not coming into the broad spectrum that's being described by my colleagues here. Not yet. I think really the enabling technologies that we look at are going to come when we can use analytics to be preventive, to be able to understand what might be in those scenarios or use cases that would help the CDC understand what the implications of an outbreak might be, or how a change in policy at CMS may make a difference. So I believe that's where we get the true leverage that we're describing. But us being able to search through and look for relationships that we would not have normally predicted on large volumes of data, which is your traditional big data use case, is not the compelling argument for us. As I said, we have volumes, but that volume of data, for example, at CMS, which is highly transactional, is a pretty well-known scenario. So really, it becomes, how do you overlay technologies? How do you really take advantage of existing technologies, overlay technologies that will allow you to get to the level where you're looking at, not just reporting, but you're taking it to predictive analytics, and how you can then leverage those technologies to give you more insight in what your data is offering you.
Yeah, I would just add, for the Army especially, the network is a key enabler. The data is a key enabler. It's really about accelerating decision-making. It's about improving situational awareness. And just to build on what Kevin said, we really need options. Sometimes it's going to be relational, sometimes it's going to be unstructured, and it's going to be coming from all directions. The volume is going to increase, but it's about the velocity. How are you going to get value out of your data when you need it, where you need it. And so we need all of those things at our disposal in order for the Army to give the options to our senior leaders and to the Joint Force and our coalitions. You need that velocity. So for big data analytics in particular, our analytic tools have to be able to handle not just static data in our data warehouse, but streaming data as it's coming in. And as you said, to be able to glean information, useful information from data that is constantly in motion at the right time, at the right place to make the right decision.
All right, we will pull on that thread a little bit more with some of the other guests. Right now, we're going to take a short break. Our guests today are Colonel Linda Jansen. She's acting director of the Army Architecture Integration Center and the chief data officer of the Army. George Chambers is executive director at the Office of Enterprise Application Development and the Office of the CIO at Health and Human Services. John Felleman is senior innovation specialist and team lead for the Acquisition Gateway at the GSA's Federal Acquisition Service. And Wolf Tomby, Chief Technology Officer at U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and Kevin Shelley, Vice President of Public Sector at MarkLogic. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin, on 360 Degrees of Government Data, sponsored by MarkLogic here on federalnewsradio.com and Federal News Radio 1500 AM.